everybody. This is Craig Faniani coming to you again from the Sacramento Jazz Education Foundation, and we're going to continue our music theory talks with a lesson on intervals. Intervals are interesting. There's an academic side to them and there's a practical side of them. We're going to go through the academic side first and figure out how to talk about them, what the terminology is and whatnot, because in the following lesson we're going to be talking about chords finally. And we're going to need to stack intervals, and we're going to need to talk about how the chords are made up. And you've already probably heard a little bit about thirds and fifths and sevenths and whatnot as well, but this is going to be a little more of the theoretical side first before we get to the other. And we're going to have a little quiz at the end, which is always fun, right? Okay, so here's the deal. Intervals aren't that hard. It's just maybe something that you have not been exposed to. It's pretty simple as long as you can refer back to your circle of fifths and you know your alphabet. So I'm confident that you know your alphabet, okay? All right, there are two kinds of intervals. There is perfect and there is imperfect. The reason that they're called perfect, most people will tell you, is because they have the simplest frequency ratios. It's also said sometimes that perfect intervals, if you invert them, you'll still have a perfect interval, as opposed to imperfect. When you invert them, you get the opposite. You get major or minor. I think the biggest distinction is because perfect intervals only have one choice. Like if you're in a major scale, your unison and fourth and fifth and eighth, there's only one choice. There's only one choice. As opposed to the imperfect intervals, you're going to have major and minor as a choice as you go up the chromatic scale. Okay, so let's talk about that. The 1, 4, 5, and 8 are perfect. And the 2, 3, 6, and 7, if you look at them on the piano, you're going to see, for instance, from C to E, there's another choice right here. And you might have heard that referred to as the minor third. Here's the major third and the minor third. So the imperfect has this, I have two choices. Here's the major sixth from C to A, and here's the minor sixth. Get the idea? If you have C to F, we don't really have that same situation, although there is this note right here. It's a very important note. So let's talk about that. And here's where I think the terminology isn't too weird, but if you take C to F, and then you want to find out what this note is, this is going to be called an augmented fourth. So this is the perfect fourth, this is the augmented fourth. So we do actually have some choice when we get to the perfect intervals. We can have the perfect interval, the augmented interval. Augmented usually means something like stretched or larger or whatever. And we can also have an F flat, which is called the diminished interval. Diminished meaning then smaller. Now, understand, this cannot be called in classical theory. This is not an E. A diminished fourth is not an E. A diminished fourth is an F flat, because our alphabet rules. The alphabet says what this is going to have to be. Okay, same thing applies. Here's a perfect fifth. Well, this can have an augmented fifth. It's called a G sharp, because it can't be an A flat because of alphabet. This is also, this if I go this way, it's called a G flat or a diminished fifth. Okay, it can't be called an F sharp if it's going to be on the G line, and it's going to be maybe because of a scale or whatever, it ends up being some sort of a G, and we would call that interval a diminished fifth if it's a G flat. C to G flat is a diminished fifth. Okay, it's important to remember that if we take all the intervals from C, the major second, the major third, the perfect fourth, the perfect fifth, the major sixth, the major seventh, and the perfect octave, all of those, if you heard the terminology, all of those are either major or perfect. In a major scale, they're all major or perfect. So once you start playing with them, you're going to get the minor from the imperfect intervals, and then you're going to get the diminished if you go a little farther. You're going to get the augmented if you go the other way, and you can do the same thing with the perfect intervals. They will have three choices. The perfect intervals will always have three choices: the perfect and an augmented if you raise it, and a diminished if you lower it. The imperfect intervals have four choices: the major that's in the major scale, the minor, diminished if you come down one more half step, and if you go above the major, it's called augmented. Now, sometimes things can get a little dicey. For instance, if I'm at C, C to C is a perfect unison. Well, that kind of makes sense. It's a little weird, but C to C is a perfect unison. C to C sharp is going to be an augmented unison. And weirdly enough, C to C flat is going to be a diminished unison. And that's a little bit impractical if you ask me. It's kind of, this is where theory kind of collides with practicality. But you understand the logic behind it. So that's C to C flat. If you see those two things and someone asks you what that interval is, you would say it's a diminished unison because they're both C's. One is just flatted and lowered. Okay, so let's take a look. If I go C to E, it's a major third. C to E sharp is an augmented third. C to E flat is a minor third. C to E double flat. E double flat is a diminished third, okay? So that way we have 4 choices. All of them would be called E because of the alphabet, but we have the diminished, the minor, the major, and the augmented. Same thing up here with, say, C to B. This is a major 7, diminished 7 if it's called a B double flat, minor 7 is the B flat, major 7, and if I call it a B sharp, it's actually called an augmented 7. Not a C, but an augmented 7 if it's a B. Stick with your alphabet. So one of the things that students say a lot of times when they're just learning this stuff is they'll say, oh, it's a major 5th. Well, now you see why it's not called a major 5th, it's called a perfect 5th. So that's the academic side of it. Now, the next part of this, and this is going to bleed over into when we're doing ear training, but you're going to want to be able to hear these intervals more than anything else. So alongside of being able to tell us what they are academically, you want to hear them. And there's a whole list of different kind of common songs that have these intervals in them. It's not the perfect way to learn intervals, but it does help you sort of hear where they are when you're starting out. When you're looking at just something within one scale, it kind of comes in handy. So if I said, can you think of any songs that have a major second? And that sounds like Happy Birthday, for instance, okay? If you have the perfect fourth, that sounds like Here Comes the Bride. You can also walk right up to it like it's on a ladder. A perfect fifth might be Star Wars or Twinkle Twinkle, and so on and so forth. So we are going to eventually be talking about how to hear intervals. And we'll be talking about playing them. We'll do some dictation with them. Very important that you can hear how those stack up because that's going to become part of how you learn how to improvise. Just as a little foreshadowing, what you want to do when you improvise is you want to hear the melody or what you're going to play in your head and then transfer that to your instrument. You're bypassing the part of looking at a piece of music and then just doing what it says to do. That would be called a written solo, and that's not really a thing. So we want to be able to have you listen to things, hear them in your head, and then produce them because those will be the purest improvisations that you can do is when they occur naturally, spontaneously, an organic, contoured melody that kind of comes to you. Those are going to be the best melodies. Okay, more on that. I'm going to be back with the next lesson, and we're going to have a little bit of question and answer on building some intervals. This is Craig Faniani for the Sacramento Jazz Education Foundation, signing off. Thank you.